It's a lifestyle moms in the suburbs didn't know much about until now. It's all here in the sizzling bestseller Women Can't Put Down. But this is just a book.
We had a drink and then down to the dungeon.
This is the real thing.
One of the neighbors said, well, I do notice men and women carrying whips.
It's a way of life you may find shocking, but not everyone does.
Said he was Master Bob and he had a slave.
Master Bob also had a wife, a now dead wife.
They saw a woman's body and everything changed.
Did one man's walk on the wild side lead to murder?
Did you murder your wife?
Absolutely not.
So who did?
He killed my wife, and now he's trying to blame it on me.
Who was keeping secrets in the suburbs? Welcome everyone, I'm Lester Holt. This may be one of the most unusual stories we've ever had here on Dateline. It starts in one of the wealthiest and perhaps most conventional suburbs in the country. But open the right door, or is it the wrong door, and you'll discover a whole other wild and very unconventional side of this famous American suburb. And something else, murder. Here's Dennis Murphy.
Most American cities have a neighborhood where the houses are bigger, the money a little older. In Detroit, it's Grosse Pointe.
It is the place that everybody wants to live. The homes are beautiful, the lawns are manicured. Everybody appears to live this perfect life.
And in this tasteful enclave of good schools, good churches, good families going back generations, Jane and Bob Bashara had made their home and raised their 2 children.
I love this place. How could you not?
Bob, Big Bob as he's known around Grosse Pointe, with the vanity plates to prove it, was active in Rotary, a past president, and hands-on for almost any community fundraiser you could name. Jane was equally busy in volunteer organizations, primarily in the high school mothers group. They'd been a couple for nearly 30 years.
We clicked pretty much right away. And within 2 years, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes.
Bob says he loved that Jane didn't hold anything back.
You know, she was outgoing, a go-getter, yet she was very loving and kind, and I just was attracted to her right from the beginning because she had a good heart.
The children came along. First Robert, then Jessica.
This is where the kids grew up?
This is where the kids grew up.
And if you look in the front yard of their gracious home on Middlesex Road, you'll see 2 towering evergreens. Bob can see his children in them.
When my son was 1, I bought a live Christmas tree, brought it in, we decorated it, and then undecorated it, took it outside, and they did the same for my daughter 2.5, 3 years later. So we have brother and sister growing next to each other. Now they're about 30 feet, and they're wonderful.
Bob Bashara, the son of a judge, is a real estate guy. He buys and sells commercial and residential properties around Detroit and takes in cash flow as a landlord. He bought his first property as a teenager and never looked back.
When you play the game Monopoly, the person with the most property wins.
Jane Bashara was a 6-figure marketing executive who'd retired several years ago, but went back to work when the recession took a toll on her husband's property business. To all appearances, the lives being lived in the nice house with the grown Christmas trees out front weren't all that much different from what was happening in homes up and down the streets of Grosse Pointe Park and out around exclusive Lakeshore Drive. Then came January 24th, 2012. It was 5:30 in the evening. Jane was driving her black Mercedes SUV home from her job in Detroit. Bob said they spoke on their cells.
She sounded perfectly fine. She said, I'm coming home, I'll be home in 20 minutes.
As Jane drove from downtown, Bob says he was tending to outside cleanup chores at one of his properties. When he got home, he thinks about 8 o'clock. There was no Jane in sight.
Did you see Jane's car here?
No, I didn't.
Anything in disarray?
No, I just assumed that she ran an errand. Well, as 8:30, 9 o'clock came, I started calling her, and her phone didn't answer.
2 more hours went by and still no Jane. Bob said he was getting anxious.
I called the Grosse Pointe Park police and alerted them that my wife wasn't answering her phone, and I said, I'm concerned, she's not here.
The next morning, a Wednesday, tow truck operators in the east end of Detroit were making their early rounds.
before their shift, they'll drive the streets and they'll look for stolen cars, abandoned cars. They make a few extra dollars. Many of the homes.
Mark Santia, a top investigative reporter, works the police beat for NBC's Detroit affiliate WDIV-TV.
So a tow truck driver spots a beautiful Mercedes SUV. It stands out in the neighborhood.
A shiny vehicle that wouldn't turn ahead in Grosse Pointe was like a flashing neon sign saying something's wrong here in Detroit's gritty East End. Just abandoned in this grungy alley, no sounds from within.
So he calls Detroit police. Sources tell me they walked up on that car. Once they poked their head in, they saw a woman's body and everything changed. This went from an abandoned vehicle to a homicide scene real quick.
The 56-year-old mother found dead inside her SUV on Detroit's east side.
So when do you get the call?
Police knocked on the door at 9:30 the next morning. I think I fell to my knees. It was absolutely the worst news I could have gotten. At that point, I just was grieving. I had to make phone calls, dreaded phone calls to my children to tell them about their mother.
Jane Bashara, a wife, a mother, a daughter, was suddenly violently dead at the age of 56. She had been strangled and severely beaten.
We're told it was made to look like it was a robbery scene. Her purse had been dumped out. It looked like she was placed in her own SUV, and that SUV was dumped in an alley on the east side of Detroit.
Grosse Pointe Park police took jurisdiction over the case. That's because their working theory was that Jane wasn't murdered in Detroit, a city that suffered 340 homicides last year alone, but in a place just 7 miles away that hasn't had a single murder since 1992.
So right away, sources were saying they believe she was killed in Grosse Pointe Park.
Grosse Pointe Park, where residents like to think their grass is a little greener, and murders simply don't happen down the block.
When we come back, police identify a person of interest, and there's a lot of interest in what had been a secret part of his life.
People saying, I don't know Bob Bashara as Grosse Pointe Bob. I know Bob Bashara as Master Bob.
When Secrets in the Suburbs continues.
Grosse Pointe Park turned out by the dozens to pay its respects to Jane Bashara, a volunteer parent at the high school whose murdered body had been found that morning inside her SUV in this seedy alley in Detroit. In the crowd, her husband Bob, a sudden widower.
Jane's family members and friends, they just cannot make sense of any of this. They cannot
Reporter Hank Winchester covered the candlelight vigil.
The first time many of us saw Bob Bashara was about 10 hours after he learned his wife was dead in a Mercedes in Detroit.
The focus now is on trying to find out what happened to her last night that ended in her death.
A small village police department was now investigating its first homicide in 20 years. The husband was grieving in public.
It's just unthinkable that this happened to her and what she had to suffer. I am just so upset about it.
Unthinkable what a respected husband and father like Bob Bashara was going through. The man known affectionately as Big Bob had no shortage of admirers, from fellow Rotarians and church members to people all around town who regarded him as a cheerful, can-do civic booster.
You're not talking about somebody who had a prior criminal history. Bob Bashara does not have a criminal history. There was no signs of domestic violence at that home.
And yet, in cases like this, for the police, the spouse is always a suspect until ruled out. Bob was cooperating with the cops, but from the very first, even with those arriving officers who broke the news of his wife's death, something about Bashara's overall responses didn't sit right with the authorities, according to Santia.
Police sources and people we talked to, they felt it was Bob as soon as they walked into the house.
Based on what?
Based on his reaction. Bob's reaction wasn't the reaction they expected when a husband learns his wife's body was just found in the east side of Detroit.
And just 3 days after Jane's murder, the suspicions of the homicide detectives were made explicit by the police chief. He announced that Bob Bashara was a person of interest in the killing.
So what's the reaction of all these supporters when the chief of police comes out and says, we have a person of interest?
You're kidding me. Bob Bashara? And that's what we heard time and time again.
There's one person of interest, Bob Bashara. What had happened there?
I have no idea. You look at my life. really look at my life and you can see all the good I've done, why on earth would I want to change all that? Why on earth would I want to kill my wife?
Bob Bashara, the community do-gooder, was all over the news. And around greater Detroit, there were people staring at their TV sets and saying, I know that guy. TV viewers who called reporter Hank Winchester and passed on juicy tips about Big Bob. Wild stories, X-rated stuff about a secret life.
Bob Bashara was the party man about Grosse Pointe, dinner parties, a Christmas event. But the other side of Bob Bashara, the real party side of Bob Bashara, happened behind closed doors. And we're not just talking about a casino night.
The tips led Winchester to talk to some of the neighbors near one of Bashara's commercial properties.
One of the neighbors said, well, I do notice from time to time men and women dressed in leather from head to toe, wearing masks, carrying whips. But that's the only thing I noticed that could be out of the ordinary. And I'm like, out of the ordinary? Yeah.
Winchester's reporting would take him down a grimy flight of exterior stairs. Behind the basement door on the right was the storage area for the bar above, the Hard Luck Lounge. The door on the left opened to a musty underground room that people who'd been inside, according to the reporter, called a sex dungeon.
Investigators want to talk with people who worked in a bar just above the alleged dungeon where Bashara spent some time.
Behind the locked door, the gossip went, Big Bob hosted wild parties and had play dates with willing women identifying themselves as his sex slaves. Well, you can imagine, once the cat was out of the bag about the two lives of Bob Bashara, the Rotarian with a whip, it became a scandalous story. And irresistible fodder for the Detroit bloggers in the underground BDSM community. That's fetish shorthand for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. They were firing off emails to reporter Hank Winchester with all the lurid details.
Thank you, sir.
Bob Bashara quickly became the public face of a very camera-shy group of fetishists.
People saying, I know Bob Bashara, but I don't know Bob Bashara as Grosse Pointe Bob. I know Bob Bashara as Master Bob.
Master Bob, in his world of whips and dog collars, the stories went, was a dom or dominant. Someone who exerted total control over his sex slaves in a dungeon like this one. Police started to ask if the S&M lifestyle might somehow be connected to Jane's murder. It surfaced that his special sex partner, according to police and media sources, was a Detroit area woman named Rachel Gillette. Rachel and Bob were together at her daughter's wedding last year. This shot of them dancing was posted on the photo company's Facebook page. Rachel herself turned out to be a chatty Cathy blogger. Her Dear Diary entry, she claimed, had Master Bob, MB's okay. Here are some samples from Rachel's online journal. I love the power you hold over me. I have written about my first encounter with his belt, ecstasy. The alternative lifestyle, as it's called in S&M circles, seems so outlandishly removed from solid old mac and cheese mainstream American mores that you might wonder if it's not just made up. But it's quite real. And this player, who says she knows intimately the other side of Bob Bashara, has come out of the shadows.
This afternoon. So we had a drink and then down to the dungeon.
Follow her down the stairs to join Master Bob and Rachel.
Coming up, a peek behind closed doors.
Next to the bed there was a giant web-like looking device.
Oh, what?
It looked like a giant spider web with rope.
Do I want to know?
When Dateline continues.
The media has painted a picture of me as a terrible person and all these different things going on in my life when they didn't know me.
Bob Bashara, the church-going Rotarian, it turned out, had a secret kinky side. And like 50 Shades of Grey, the erotic blockbuster bestseller about an S&M relationship, this real-life 50 Shades of Grosse Pointe had become a steamy topic.
Bob Bashara's alleged secret life.
And investigators looking into the murder of his wife Jane Bashara were pursuing the sex dungeon angle too. This S&M business, based on power and control with some pain thrown in, seemed way more than the all-too-common woman on the side theory of motivation. They wondered Could it have something to do with the murder? Fetishists were coming out of the woodwork.
The day that I heard the news, I went to the police right off.
This woman told detectives about her 2009 romp in the dungeon she said she had with a man she knew only as Master Bob.
I told them, I said Rachel was his slave.
She's asked that we call her Lynn. Disguised beneath theatrical makeup, she agreed to talk to us about her sexual lifestyle and the person she knows as Master Bob. Lynn, a single mom with a job, had made her own journey from the straight life, vanilla as she calls it, and understands the lure of being controlled and dominated.
How do you go through that door?
It's a scary door, especially for somebody, later in life discovering this. The sex life, it was pretty boring to
Conventional,
me. Always
we're talking, right?
conventional, vanilla. Yeah, so I stumbled upon it, and it kind of hit me. I'm like, well, this is what I've been missing.
You're a submissive.
Yes. Submissive means you submit to that dominant. So the submissive will do pretty much anything her dominant says.
We talking about putting on collars and
Yes,
whips?
whips, flogs, canes, crops. Yeah.
Lynn said dungeon parties can be held just about anywhere. In warehouses, rental halls, garages, even suburban rec rooms. Invitations come through the web and word of mouth.
What about that? You're invited to a dungeon party. How do you know you're not going to John Wayne Gacy's?
Yeah, you don't. You don't. With me personally, I talk to people for a while. If there's anything that doesn't sound right, I wouldn't go.
She said she heard about the dungeon beneath the bar from Bashara himself, and that he found her on an alternative lifestyle website.
Said he was Master Bob and he was a slave. And the reason I followed through was because I had not experienced a dungeon. And so understanding the draw and the excitement, I had to see the dungeon.
So one afternoon, Lynn said she met Master Bob and his special slave Rachel for the first time. She said the three of them spent a few minutes at the bar, chatted about nothing in particular, and relaxed with a few stiff drinks.
And then down to the dungeon. And the first thing I see in the far corner is a bed. Next to the bed there was a giant web-like looking device.
Oh, what?
It looked like a giant spider web with rope.
Do I want to know?
It was a 360 type web.
How do you break the ice?
All of that was quick because she disrobed as soon as we got there and already had her collar on, and that's what I was ordered to do, and that's what I did.
The grungy basement Lynn described was fitted out with toys and gear recognized in the Middle Ages as instruments of torture.
Then there was a St. Andrew's cross in the corner, and that's where we initially both had our first flogging.
Lynn, you say that so easily. My first flogging in the dungeon.
Yeah.
And Master Bob is telling you what to do.
Yes.
And you're having a great time.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
Even so, she never went back to Master Bob's dungeon. She liked Rachel well enough, but Master Bob?
Self-absorbed, very, very dominant. When I say he is Master Bob, I believe he believes that with every fiber of his being.
She went to the police, she said, because she believed Bob's secret life might be relevant.
The whole purpose of this, of my talking with the police, of any of this, is justice for Jane's murder.
There is a working police theory of the motivation in this case that leads through Master Bob's dungeon door. A crime with its roots in an old-fashioned love triangle, but with a kinky twist. The cops speculate that Bashara had become so consumed with his S&M lifestyle and the slave he shared it with that his wife Jane just didn't fit anymore into the relationship math. But keep in mind that's only a theory. It could also be that Bashara simply didn't do it, wasn't involved in any manner at all. If there's any hard forensic evidence linking Bob Bashara to the murder, it hasn't surfaced. If Bashara does get charged in the case, the absence of DNA-type evidence might be an obstacle to the prosecution in trial.
In today's day and age, when you have a very savvy law and order CSI jury, you need to have scientific proof. You need
Show
to
me
show
that this husband was there.
Show me. Show me either cell phone records, show me DNA, show me. It's not enough to tell me a nice story. Show me the science.
It won't be science, but here's where this key character comes in. He was a handyman named Joe who worked for Bob Bashara. And Joe had a story to tell that would blow the doors off the case. And then this man, an ex-cop, would learn blockbuster details of Joe's story. And you're about to hear them for the first time.
Coming up, is Bob Bashara in the clear. Someone else has confessed to killing his wife.
He takes his foot, he puts it on her neck, and he steps down, and she doesn't move anymore. She's dead.
When Secrets in the Suburbs continues.
The Jane Bashara murder investigation had gotten off to a fast start. 2 days after her body was discovered in a Detroit alley, her husband was named a person of interest. And just 4 days after that, a huge guy walked into the police station, and his story would turn the case upside down. His name was Joe Gentz, a handyman by trade who'd done some minor fix-it work for Bob Bashara at Bob's home and rental properties.
He was about 6 feet 6 inches tall. He's got about a size 16 shoe, massive hands. He's a big guy.
A big man with reportedly a child's mind.
He has a 3rd grade IQ. He's mentally impaired.
I ran into him, he just looked at me, he said, I need to talk.
But you thought something was eating at him or what?
Someone was eating him.
After hearing why Joe the handyman was so upset, Steve Vergona, a good friend, convinced the big guy to come clean and drove him to the Grosse Pointe Park Police Department where he confessed to murder.
I said, my friend's here to confess something. And the police officer, what are you here for? To confess. He goes, Jane Bashara.
Hours later, we break the story that Joe Gentz is talking to police, and he's giving them very specific details.
Police investigators grilled the handyman for 3 days, but at the end of their interrogation, the cops did a very surprising thing. They let Joe Gentz go. He'd confessed to murder, then walked out the front door without any charges. It seemed as though Joe Gentz couldn't get anyone in authority to believe him.
We'll take care of it.
Santia, the police beat reporter, wanted Gentz's full story. He had his own law enforcement sources, but for this case, he felt he needed a special reporting partner. So he called on a former Detroit cop named Tom Berry, T-Berry for short.
I know when I need help, and I knew I needed help, and there's nobody I'd rather ask than T-Berry. And the guy has more than 30 years experience dealing with murderers, rapists.
T. Berry, a veteran homicide detective who'd retired as a lieutenant in 2006, jumped at the chance to get back in the game of chasing down leads.
So you didn't have your gold shield anymore, but the old instincts kicked in, huh?
Yeah, they did.
How do I handle this?
It's something I want to do. I want to see if maybe I still got it.
To piece together a composite of the alleged Gentz confession, Santia and T. Berry worked their police sources and spoke at length with Steve Vergona, the Gentz confidant. Dateline also sat down with those same three, Vergona, Santia, and T. Berry, and importantly, was able to confirm independently that Joe Gentz told the story you're about to hear. According to Vergona and others, Gentz said his involvement with Bob Bashara started in the fall of 2011. Gentz claimed that Bashara made him a business proposal that had nothing to do with painting garages or doing cleanup and repair work in Bob's backyard.
Bob quickly changes from, I need you to do some cleanup work at my apartments, to, I need you to kill my wife. But then Joe quickly looked to subcontract the hit with a couple of friends.
One of those friends was Steve Vergona, who said he immediately turned Gentz down. But he said Gentz did try to involve him in two murder schemes. The first was death by a supposedly undetectable injection of drugs.
And he asked me, he goes, could you know how to get some insulin?
The lethal drug plan withered. But next up, Steve said Bashara wanted Joe Gentz to run his wife off the road when she was in her Mercedes.
He said, Steve, can you do a hit and run on somebody?
A hit and run?
Hit and run.
So as Gentz tells it, this guy is asking me to kill his wife.
Yes.
It's not put her in a hospital bed or a rehab home.
He wants her dead.
This is Joe the handyman telling his associates or his friends, the guys in his circle, what, Steve and a few others maybe?
Steve and a few other people. Yep. Joe kept saying, I didn't believe him. I thought he was just joking around. But Bob kept asking me over and over to kill his wife.
According to Steve and other sources, Gentz said Bashara offered him a used Cadillac and some cash to pull off the murder. Then came the events of January 24th, 2012. A chilling account that Santia and T. Berry would piece together from sources. Sources saying that Gentz the handyman got a call from his sometime boss, Bob Bashara.
And says, hey, I need you to be at my house at 7 o'clock tonight. We're going to do it tonight. It's going to happen tonight. So he walks over to the Bashara home in Grosse Pointe Park. And he's let in by Bob.
According to T. Berry and Santia's sources, Gentz said Jane was already in the house. The handyman had come there supposedly to sort some boxes in the garage.
Jane comes out and starts yelling at Bob, hey, we move this stuff, we do this stuff in the basement, I need that stuff in my car, you gotta do this. And he says that Bob says, do her now, I mean now. Gentz kind of looks at him, he says that Bob produces a gun. He's got a gun in his hand.
Steve Vergona, who has been interviewed by police, says he got it from the horse's mouth. Gentz himself claiming that Bashara threatened to kill him on the spot.
When he told you the story about being in the garage, did he say that Bashara had a gun on him?
Yes.
And said you got to do it right now?
Do it right now.
And as sources said, Gentz claimed he did it and offered up devastating details.
So he takes his right hand and he chops her in the back of the head. He's a huge man. She goes down in a pile on the ground. She's not knocked out. She's screaming for her husband. What's going on? Bob, what's going on? He says, finish her off now, as he points the gun at her. So Gentz gets down on his knees, and he's like 6'5", he begins to choke her. And she still doesn't die. So he gets up, he goes, finish her, finish her, finish her, and he takes his foot and he puts it on her neck and he steps down and he hears her crack. And she doesn't move anymore. She's dead.
Remember, T-Berry's account is coming from sources, and those sources said Gentz claimed that Bashara ordered him to dispose of the wife's body.
He says that Bob puts the gun in his back pocket. He's going to help him move the body in the car. As they lift up the body, her blouse comes up, exposes her breast. And Bob, being that he's married to the woman, I got to believe, pulls her blouse down and says, I'm sorry, baby, then dumps her like a piece of trash in the back of the car.
The story of the bared breast, the husband's alleged words, might sound like the tale from a cheap crime novel. But the former cop remembered what he'd been told about the condition of the body when it was recovered from the abandoned SUV, and something there jived.
The sources that we have are telling us that she's not wearing a bra. And that could be not a big deal, but it is a big deal.
It was time to move the car, sources said.
Bob goes in the house, takes one of her purses, shows her credit cards around the car, phone falls on the floor of the car, and he's told to get rid of her. So the garage door goes up, Bob's in his car, he backs his car out of the driveway, Gentz backs Jane's car out of the driveway and starts driving. And that's the way Gentz tells the story.
It all sounded like a murder out of Pulp Fiction. And Bob Bashara says that's all the handyman's story is when it comes to accusations of his involvement. Pure fiction.
Coming up, Bob Bashara tells his story.
He crossed the line, killed my wife, and now he's trying to blame it on me.
When Dateline continues.
A month after it seemed the Grosse Pointe Park police hadn't believed the murder confession of the handyman Joe Gentz, someone in authority finally did.
You're under arrest for the murder of Gentz.
The Wayne County prosecutor charged Gentz with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Conspiracy. By definition, it takes more than one person to conspire. The prosecutor said the investigation was continuing. Was there another shoe here waiting to drop? Was Bob Bashara the unindicted co-conspirator, a party to the murder of his wife Jane?
I have no idea what happened. I wasn't here. And all I know is that he's admitted doing this. They have the man behind bars. Let me rebuild my life. Let me move on.
Last month, Dateline interviewed Bashara at the home where he lived with his wife Jane for 25 years. Bashara has not been arrested or charged with a crime and says he's still grieving deeply for his murdered wife.
I miss her terribly. The mother of two wonderful children is gone, and that just absolutely saddens me.
The police, however, say Bashara remains a person of interest in the killing. Bashara says the cops told him that he flunked their polygraph test.
I don't believe that I did. I answered every question truthfully.
I've never seen a case with as many police leaks.
Bashara's lawyer, David Grimm, thinks the cops are trying to make his client squirm by putting out prejudicial stories about him. For instance, he doesn't believe Bashara flunked a police lie detector test at all.
He's since taken another polygraph and passed it by a far more competent polygraph examiner who the police used.
Well, let's introduce this Joe, because this is
We
Joe.
eventually got around to the subject of Joe Gentz. Just who was this handyman?
I knew he wasn't playing with a full deck. I knew that he had some issues. The fellow that referred him to him says he's a little goofy, but he's okay.
Bashara says he first met the person who multiple sources say would become his chief accuser last fall when Gentz was looking for an apartment to rent.
I was nice enough to help him get a place to live.
Bashara says his big mistake with Gentz was trying to throw some odd jobs his way, including some repair and cleanup chores in Bashara's backyard.
He had met Jane out in the back, and she brought us iced tea one day when we were cleaning up shrubbery and preparing the backyard for the winter.
But Bashara said he and Gentz had a big falling out over money.
He called me incessantly, needed to talk, needed money, because he had a custody hearing where he needed $1,500 to pay a lawyer, and I wouldn't give it to him.
Bashara's theory is that Jane, wrong time, wrong place, got caught in the middle of Gentz's furious demands for ever more money.
He must have come over here looking for me. I wasn't here on the 24th, ran across Jane, and he said, I need to talk to Bob. And she probably told him he's not here, and maybe he pushed her. Maybe he came in and wanted to, I don't know what happened. I wasn't here, but I got to imagine that Jane told him to go to hell, get out of my house. And he snapped.
He tells the story, allegedly, that you're there in the garage with a gun on him. You say, do it now. He gives her a karate chop. She drops. She's fighting on the floor, and he stomps on her neck, and you're there.
Unbelievable that he would even say that. The man is a disturbed man, and he made a mistake. And he crossed the line, killed my wife, and now he's trying to blame it on me.
And said he did it for what, a little $1,000 or so in an old beat-up Cadillac?
First of all, he said $2,000,
Yeah.
then it was $6,000, then it was $8,000 in a Cadillac. I didn't offer him anything to do anything. Think about it just for a moment. If you wanted to harm someone, would you hire a guy with a 68 IQ and have the work done in your garage, in your home? Just for a moment, think about that. Does that make any sense? Absolutely not. I mean, I'm not a nefarious person, but I'm certainly not going to hire an idiot to kill my wife in my garage.
Bashara's attorney says Gentz has told his murder in the garage story in no fewer than 7 different versions. The most preposterous being, he thinks, his client forcing the handyman to kill at gunpoint.
How realistic is that somebody would hold a gun to someone's head and force them to kill their wife?
You don't see that movie?
Oh, nobody would ever believe that storyline if this was a movie.
I don't own a gun. I am not violent. I stopped playing football because I didn't like hitting people. I loved my wife dearly. Loved my wife, the mother of my children. I would never harm a hair on her head.
But then there were the stories about the other Bob he had to contend with. The unappealing stories in the blogosphere about Master Bob, dominating his sex slave Rachel in the private dungeon, not unlike the way he was depicted as dominating the handyman in the garage. Bashara had always maintained that Rachel was only a friend. Back in February, he was asked about her by local TV reporter Mark Santia.
Were you having an affair?
No, I was not. I loved my wife. I loved my children.
But here's how he answered that question 2 months later.
Were there other women?
I do not want to get into a lot of this because of my children, but I will tell you that I did have I have a relationship with one other woman.
Is this the woman known as Rachel?
Yes. But it has nothing to do with this case or anything to do with the death of Jane. Nothing at all.
But there was another woman to talk to Bashara about, someone who'd caught the eyes of investigators. His chatty mistress, Rachel, had let it be known that the two of them were shopping for a third partner, a new slave.
The defenders have uncovered a new witness who's come forward from out of state.
According to Santia's police sources, Master Bob, Rachel, and an unidentified woman from Oregon were planning to set up a three-way in a house of bondage not far from Bashara's in Grosse Pointe Park. Was the new arrangement a recipe for murder?
Coming up, had investigators found a motive?
That becomes what, the theory for motivation for the prosecution?
Absolutely, but it's not.
When Secrets in the Suburbs continues.
Joe the handyman, multiple sources said, had accused the husband of ordering his wife's murder. The husband, Bob Bashara, denied that ever happened. But now a woman from Oregon had arrived in the picture, and her presence would raise some questions. It began with a search, a kind of wanted, the XXX rated kind. Bashara's other woman, Rachel, was blogging about searching with Master Bob for another slave to complete a fantasy three-way household. We are looking for a special girl, a third to round out our relationship. My very first requirement is that they have to adore MB. Finally, according to Rachel's blog, they seem to settle on the right sort of submissive, a woman from Oregon. WDIV-TV's Hank Winchester picks up the story.
This is a woman that Bob and Rachel met online. She caught a quick glimpse into Bob Bashara's life, the money, the beautiful house, the luxury cars, lakefront living in a suburb of Detroit. And on top of it all, you're into a kinky lifestyle and I am too, so let's get the party going.
January 10th, 2012, they are forming a bond to someday be master and slave. Investigators looking to pin Bashara with a motive for murder may have found it, according to Mark Santia.
Police sources tell us several people have been called as witnesses and put under oath, but perhaps no one is more important than this woman from Oregon.
To investigators, Rachel's blog entry on January 10, 2012 seemed a significant date. It came exactly 2 weeks before Jane's murder. And around the same time, sources were telling Santia that handyman Joe Gentz had claimed Bashara had given him a deadline for murder.
And Joe says, in the garage, I was just told, hurry up and do it. There's a deadline. Hurry up and finish the job.
Sources have also told Santia that Bashara was close to buying a second home in the exclusive Grosse Pointe area, not far from where he lived with Jane.
There's motive, there's reason, and going back to Joe's statement, there's a deadline.
And when you connect the dots, the wife, Jane, is odd woman out.
And that's the theory they're working right now, that basically Jane's in the way.
And according to a Hank Winchester police source, there may be a witness who backs up part of Gentz's story. His claim that he and Bashara were at the Bashara house at the same time that night.
There is a neighbor who called police and said, I noticed that night Bob Bashara pulling his Navigator out of the driveway. And a short time later, I saw Jane Bashara's black Mercedes leave the driveway. But Jane Bashara wasn't driving the car. This person says Joe Gentz was driving that car.
Bashara's lawyer discounts the neighbor's sighting story as more police misinformation.
My belief is it didn't happen. I believe there will be no such evidence.
David Grimm asserts his client is innocent. And if there is a trial, Grimm would welcome a credibility contest between the husband and the handyman.
If Joe Gentz is going to be the horse that the prosecution rides in a trial against Bob Bashara, I think they've got a lame horse, and I don't think that horse is going to make it to the finish line.
As for the S&M lifestyle, the dungeon, the lawyer says that has nothing to do with the murder investigation, and he would do his utmost to prevent any potential jury from ever hearing about it.
Aren't we talking about things that are so prejudicial that they could cause a jury to come back with the wrong verdict despite the evidence or the lack of evidence?
In our interview, Bashara maintained his innocence throughout.
Did you murder your wife? Did you cause her death?
Absolutely not.
Were you in cahoots with this handyman guy?
No.
To come in and do the dirty work?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Let me tell you something. I loved my wife dearly. Loved my wife.
But for the first time in public, Bashara had acknowledged to Dateline that Rachel was his mistress. He also said, without providing specifics, that his wife was aware of the other woman in his life.
Jane and I had a very good relationship. We had understandings on certain things.
Would you say it's what they used to call an open marriage in the 70s?
Well, I don't want to go that far, but it was a little bit like that,
There was some sort of an understanding between
We had an understanding, correct. And that's what people are going to find hard to believe. Her family, her friends.
Jane's family and friends declined Dateline's interview requests, but her family did issue a statement rejecting any claims of an open marriage. We as a family are certain that Jane would have chosen to end her marriage rather than participate in an open marriage. Any comments made to the contrary should be met with disbelief.
Did Jane know about the alternative lifestyle?
No. You try to keep things private, not to embarrass anyone.
The woman known as Rachel declined an interview, but said through her attorney that she met Bob 3 years ago on alt.com, that Bob said he was close to a final divorce from his wife, that she and Bob were about to close on a house for their three-way with the lady from Oregon, and that she has no idea what happened to Jane.
Bob, this really gets complicated by what's being called your alternative lifestyle, and people who say they know a different Bob Bashara, they know Master Bob.
Well, you know,
what do you say about it all?
Let me tell you, it was a private part of my life. It was nothing, it had nothing to do with Jane. And people talk about that dark side. They don't even know about what's involved with that. They think of this terrible notion of different things, but they don't know. They don't know what was going on, and I really don't feel like I can discuss that at this point, knowing that there may be an impending case. I don't know what to say.
That case could turn on Rachel's dreamy blogs about a soon-to-be three-way household with a woman from Oregon.
Yeah, that becomes what the theory for motivation for the prosecution.
Absolutely, but it's not.
That you went through the door into this lifestyle and you couldn't get back, and now you wanted to be in a three-way relationship, and we're looking for a woman in Oregon to join you, and the math didn't work. It was one woman too many, and that's why she's dead.
No, absolutely not. That is so untrue, because Rachel had those dreams of the white picket fence and the other person. She wanted that life, and I wasn't able to give it to her. I didn't leave Jane. I had no interest in leaving Jane. I had nothing to do with her death. I loved her. Absolutely loved her.
So the man with the two lives waits for the prosecutor to make the next move, either to lift the cloud of suspicion that hangs over Grosse Pointe Bob, or to charge Master Bob in a murder conspiracy, the man who went through a dungeon door and couldn't find his way back.
That's all for this edition of Dateline Friday. We'll be back again for Dateline Sunday at 7, 6 Central. And I'll see you tomorrow on Today. I'm Lester Holt for all of us at NBC News. Good night.